on Facebook? Cool. So welcome everybody to our online virtual service area briefing. I'm Jess. A lot of people in here might know me, and we've done some service area briefings in the past as public events in various locations throughout the community. So we've obviously had to move these kind of events online, but we wanted to continue to bring all different resources to the community and make sure that we're still getting information out there to people as best as we can while we are working from home. So as an NAC coordinator, part of my job is to connect residents with all the various different services for homeowners from DHCD in the city. So these kind of programs include basic systems repair, adaptive modification, foreclosure prevention, many other programs. So I'll put a link somewhere in the chat and probably in the comments on Facebook with a link to all the programs I can help connect people with, along with my email address and phone number if people would like to reach out. And like I said, we often also try to bring events to the community in person to connect them with resources, but today we have moved that online and we have guests from the Committee of 70 and the League of Women Voters here to talk with us today. So now I will pass it over to Pat.
All righty, thank you so much, Jess and the team at New Kensington CDC. I'm so happy to be here again. My name is Pat Christmas. I'm the policy director for the Committee of 70, but also a League of Women Voters member, and 70 in the League of a long history around voter education in particular. And this is a big year for voter education. So what I'm going to do here is share my screen because we have a few slides to go through and a lot to talk about. Obviously, this is a monster year for the country and for the state and for the city. And the question of the day and the question for this webinar is, will your voice be heard this November? Of course, the answer has to be yes. But this is a much more complicated and fraught year for a number of reasons. Are we seeing the screen okay? Just want to make sure that's, yep, I'm getting a yes nod. All right. So the Committee of 70 has recently launched this initiative, We Vote. And the theme of the year, none of us thought this would be so critical, but to maximize the number of people who are voting at home, maximize the number of people who are voting by mail. So that's a good bit of what we're going to talk about this morning and in this early afternoon is mail voting, which is a pretty new procedure for folks here in Pennsylvania. So let me see if I'm able to move along through my slides easy enough. Oh, actually was not. Okay, so again, I'm with both the Committee 70 and the League of Women Voters. The only thing I would stress here is that 70 and the League have been around for an awfully long time. And I got to tell you, we have been racking our brains for, was there an election or a set of elections quite like the one we have now? And honestly, I think the answer is no. This is not the first global pandemic that we've dealt with, and we've had to run elections. This is not the first time where the world and the country have a great many problems that are just in our. We're having to deal with on a daily basis, but these conditions really are new. And fortunately, we do have some new election law that's in place that makes it easier for us to vote. But again, not just the law and election officials making these changes, but for the electorate and for the voters being ready to cast a ballot on their end will be critical. So we've been around a long time. We've seen a lot, but even this year is fairly new for us. So one of the things that we think about at the Committee of 70 is what boosts turnout, right? This is something that a lot of people are talking about and are concerned about this year, especially because of the special kind of concerns and conditions we're voting under. What's turnout going to be? And at 70, we think that election structures have something to do with it, and this means what the election laws are. Is does anyone have the ability to cast a vote by mail if they wish? If they're voter ID provisions, how strict are those? Where are polling places going to be, and to what extent might they be consolidated, and when might that consolidation happen? All those kind of structural aspects of the election that can either make it easier for people to vote or make it not so easy for people to vote. So that's one piece. Another is whether or not there's a competitive election or not to vote for. I think unequivocally this November, Everybody knows that there's a big election at the very top of the ballot. Everybody knows that this U.S. presidency is a big deal, and I think that assuredly will notch turn up higher, perhaps than it's been in an awfully long time. And associated with these competitive races, especially the higher profile ones, the national races, the state races, that means that also the campaigns are going to be spending millions and millions of dollars. And because Pennsylvania is especially important in the presidential election through the Electoral College, count on a lot of money going into TV ads, into social media ads, and these marginal tactics to put turnout up one way or the other is also going to, I think, juice turnout a bit. The last thing is this, and it gets to the line that's on the slide here, which is that although voting is a private act, it's a civic act as well, and connected to your larger community. And this is something that some communities and some communities with their own culture have figured this out and have known this for a long time. So for example, organized labor, keyword being organized. Folks in a union have always understood that voting has real power, and that's why in unions turnout is always higher, and not just the members of that union, but their families and their close associates also turn out higher because of the nudges and the pushes of the people within that union. Another great example is many church congregations also. Like when an election's coming up, I mean that's what we're talking about as we're getting ready to go to church on Sunday. And so turnout with certain church congregations will be higher. It's also true that in some neighborhoods in Philadelphia, you go into a neighborhood in Philadelphia when the election's coming up, more households than not have campaign signs up, and clearly people know that it's getting ready to be time to cast a ballot. And that goes to like the kind of the vibe and the culture of that given neighborhood and community. So, that's something that, I think we also have to stress, because, culture is obviously, it's made up of people, and it takes a long time to change. But one of the things that we would want to see over a course of years is a stronger culture of voting that extends even beyond those communities I just mentioned, extends beyond organized labor, beyond certain church congregations, extends into numerous other kind of entities and places where people live their lives. Young people in particular, that's one that there's a lot of work around that right now. Getting young people to understand as best they can that casting a ballot is not just something they're doing on their own, but it's something they're doing on behalf of their family, on behalf of their neighborhood, on behalf of their community, and on behalf of their city and their state. That's a connection I think it's really worth connecting. Okay, so that's why voting matters, at least one of the ways we think about it. And then the last thing I always nod, and I spent a lot of time in high school classrooms, especially as a former biology teacher. I've looked for every opportunity to get back into a Philadelphia high school when I can to talk about voting. It goes without saying that the franchise just doesn't exist because it exists. It began at the very beginning highly restricted to only a few people, right? Only white men with property. And it's taken blood, sweat, tears, and lives to expand the franchise over generations to where it is today. The work is not done. It's not yet as easy as it should be to cast a vote safely, securely, independently across the country. The fact that we have 50 states and each has its own election law is both an advantage, because some states do this a whole heck of a lot better than others, and they can be in the vanguard. Other states are not nearly as far behind, and that's where we are still battling state by state and as a country to make sure that everyone can cast a ballot. Obviously, U.S. Representative John Lewis was a living legend and spent a lifetime expanding this franchise as powerfully as any individual. So, I think a nod to Representative Lewis and the thousands and thousands of others who've done the work over generations has to be nodded to. So yeah, to this year, right? This is pretty unique, and we are extremely fortunate that in October of 2019, it just so happens that a election law reform was passed, a historic agreement between Democrats and Republicans in Harrisburg that had several kind of critical provisions in it. And one of these provisions was to allow any Pennsylvanian to vote by mail. Now, previously, only absentee ballots were available for Pennsylvania voters. And this basically meant for any individual who's going to be outside of their municipality for a specific reason. if they were going to be on vacation or for work, or for business, or if they were going to be ill or bedridden or disabled and could not leave their home, they would be eligible to use an absentee ballot. That's a pretty limited set of people for whom they could vote from home and vote by mail. As part of this election reform package, a quote unquote mail-in ballot was also created. And what we have now is any Pennsylvanian being able to use this mail-in ballot. And now the confusing thing I'll note is that the absentee ballot still exists. And the reason for this is because, Pennsylvania is an old state. There's a lot of stuff in our Constitution. So some of the stuff definitely should not be there anymore. And one of those things is the rules for absentee voting. So absentee voting, which we've had for many, many years, is still in our Constitution. And because it is difficult to change our Constitution in the state of Pennsylvania, that absentee voting has stayed where it is. And it's still available for whoever is going to be, again, outside of the municipality or ill or disabled. They can apply and use an absentee ballot, vote for home. This other mail-in ballot was created just by statute and is now available to any Pennsylvanian to also vote by mail. And the absentee ballot and the mail-in ballot are basically the same thing. It's just that the conditions for using absentee are different. Long story short, anyone who's viewing this right now, you are eligible to apply and use a mail-in ballot. And that'll be perfectly fine. Whether you're going to be outside of your municipality or you're ill or disabled, any Pennsylvanian can vote using the quote unquote mail-in ballot. So that's a really critical thing to have there. The other big changes, and there was really a remarkable election reform package that was passed last year. The voter registration deadline for many years has been 30 days before the election. That was shortened to 15 days before the election, which, for voting rights advocates, we very much like that because that's an extra almost 2 weeks for people to register to vote before the election. For election officials, they were a little bit more anxious about that because it means they have a whole lot more processing to do with election coming up very quickly. So, it's a bit of a strain on our county election officials, but they're figuring it out. Another key change was the elimination of the straight ticket voting button. Which means that in a general election going forward, starting in this November, there will no longer be a little button at the top of the voting machine or a little bubble at the top of your provisional or absentee or mail-in ballot, where you can just push that button or fill in that bubble and vote for one party all the way down. That's a feature that we've had in the state of Pennsylvania for many, many years, and there are different reasons for why that option has been there, but that option has been removed, and what it means is that, if you're a staunch Democrat and you're ready to vote for Democratic candidates up and down the ballot, you will just have to push each button on the voting system for each candidate or fill in each bubble on your mail-in ballot all the way down. And same thing if you're a staunch Republican, you want to vote for Republicans up and down the ballot, you'll just have to mark those choices all the way down. Simply that. And the last thing I'll just note is that there was also critically, and this is part of the reason this election reform package came together last year when it did, is funding. Critical funding for voting systems, which we have new voting systems in all 67 counties, and for census outreach. So this is one of those funny situations where in Harrisburg it was not exactly only on the merits and what's best for our elections and the voters that brought this together. There was a number of kind of different political threads that brought this together, but overall it was a very good deal for voters, and most critically the mail-in voting option was included, which in October of 2019, we never could have possibly imagined how essential that ability to vote would be this year, obviously during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the mechanics of how you vote by mail a little bit later in the webinar, but I thought it was just important to note that like this, if folks are a little confused about how elections work this year and this new mail-in voting thing, that's okay, because the mail-in voting is basically brand new, and it's something that a lot of people are doing for the very first time, including me. I voted by mail also for the first time this past June 2nd primary. The last couple bullets here about again, we'll get into this more in the mechanics of voting by mail, but there are strict deadlines both to apply and to get the ballot in. The applications have to be in to your county board of elections the Tuesday before the election at 5 o'clock. Postmarks don't matter. So if you're doing it online, you have to do it before 5 o'clock the Tuesday prior. If you're returning a paper application by mail, you need to make sure that paper application is sent early enough to get to your county before Tuesday at 5. And that a similar restriction for actually returning the mail-in or provision or absentee ballot itself. Postmarks do not matter. It has to be in on election day by 8 o'clock to your counties. And this is where, again, a little bit later in the presentation, we'll talk about what the options may be to return our ballots, because especially if the deadline's coming up in just a day or two or three, it probably will not be safe to put your ballot in the mail anymore. It'll probably be received too late. And we really need to minimize the number of people to whom they're put in that position. So, this is what happens when there's a new way of voting, and especially a new way of voting in a year like this, where everything is political. Almost everything has become partisan, unfortunately, including face masks to protect ourselves in the middle of a pandemic. There are myths that are largely partisan driven about voting by mail, and so 3 of those I'd flag. Just not the folks joining us for the webinar today are going to be inclined to believe these and be disseminating these, but these myths are out there, and it's important that if someone raises them, like, you have something to respond back to. But then also, again, in addition to that, there are a lot of reasonable questions about voting by mail too, especially how you do it, which we're going to get to later. But one is, and this, we're hearing this a lot from the highest echelons of our government right now, in the executive branch, coming from the White House, and it's that vote by mail is opening the door to voter fraud. And this is untrue. This is untrue. You can see the figure in here where in Oregon, where almost everybody votes by mail, they cast millions and millions and millions of mail ballots, and the percentage of those fraudulent is a minuscule percentage. There's similar numbers coming out of Colorado and Washington State, where again they've been voting by mail pretty much the entire electorate for many years. Almost no one tries to exercise some sort of voter fraud, because it just makes no sense for someone to do that on an individual basis. There have been occasional schemes hatched around mail-in voting and absentee voting years back, and actually most recently, just a couple years ago, there was an absentee voting scheme run by a Republican operative down in North Carolina, right? And where the schemes tend to come up, they're run by an operative or 2 or 3 who have money and are trying to orchestrate something on their own, and they often get caught. So the Republican operative in North Carolina got caught. Back in the early 90s, there was an absentee voting fraud issue, actually in Pennsylvania, around one of our state Senate races. Like, that issue got found out and addressed. So those instances are very, very rare, very, very rare. And when you have millions upon millions of people voting, the instances of irregularities are just minuscule. So this is a with regards to integrity, it's a safe way to vote, and especially with regards to keeping people safe and voting from home this year, it's a safe way to vote. The other myth and concern is out there, and this one's a bit more widely spread, is that if I mail in my vote, my ballot may be less at risk of being counted. And this is where folks need to rest assured, whether you cast a ballot on a voting system on election day, if you send in an absentee or mail-in ballot, or if you vote by provisional ballot at your polling place, if for whatever reason you have to vote on that provisionals are kind of an emergency paper ballot in case they can't find your name in the poll book, or it says in the poll book that you requested a mail-in ballot and you just didn't receive it, you're going to have to use the provisional. That provisional ballot, as long as you're an eligible voter, is also counted. So any of those ballots count, including the mail ballot. So it is absolutely not the case where all the voting system ballots are counted, but the mail ballots, the provisional ballots will only be counted if it's a close election. Every ballot cast by an eligible voter is counted, period. It's always been that way, and will always be that way. The only real risks here is if there are mistakes made by the voter in completing the ballot and returning the ballot, or if the ballot misses the deadline, then there's a risk it's not going to be counted. In fact, if it's in past the deadline, it will not be counted, which is why those deadlines matter so much. But if you get the ballot in time, if you're an eligible voter, it will count. And there's actually fortunately there's a tracking system. It's a new kind of rudimentary tracking system compared to some other states. But there is a barcode on the outside of the return envelope. It's not connected to who you vote for, but it is connected to you as a voter, so election officials know whether or not you returned a ballot. You are able to track whether or not your ballot was received by county election officials. And this is actually something, if you voted by absentee or by mail in the June 2nd primary, this is something you can check right now. votespa.com is the state's voter website. And you can see it on the slide here, votespa.com slash mail ballot status is where you check that, check on whether or not your ballot was received. So that's I think should provide some extra assurance to you if you get your ballot in, it will be received and it will be counted. And then lastly, and this is largely driven by the partisan narratives out there, is that mail voting will benefit one party or the other. We do have, again, starting from the White House, these allegations of voter fraud being widespread with vote by mail and vote by mail not being safe. That is apparently that's having some effect on Democrats versus Republicans voting by mail. But when you look at all 50 states and when these systems have been set up, I mean, there is no systemic advantage between one party or another. I mean, it's a problem right now when there's such a loud partisan voice to stop people from voting this way. But absent kind of that unique circumstance, vote by mail, it benefits the Democrats, it benefits Republicans, like whoever is eligible to vote this way. It's a good thing. It's a good thing to do. And there's a growing effort amongst Republicans, but a bipartisan effort as well to try to push back against the president's messaging in particular, because whether for Republican voters or for Democratic voters, this is the best way to cast a ballot during this pandemic. So again, this is the last myth, is that like voting by mail is only for one party or another. Just not true. So getting into the mechanics here, and we're not going to go through every little detail of voting by mail, but we do want to make sure we go through kind of the most kind of critical points, and those include, for starters, you want to apply as soon as you can, and I would encourage everybody to vote this way for the November 3rd election. And the mail and absentee request form online on the votespa.com website is already live. If you just Google mail voting Pennsylvania, that website's going to come up quickly. And it is actually quite valuable and important for folks to apply earlier rather than later. There's actually kind of a nifty little graphic that Common Cause produced, suggesting that in a similar way to flattening the curve for COVID-19 to keep the number of folks in our hospitals down and make sure we can keep as many people healthy as possible. A similar concept applies to requesting a mail-in ballot. If we can maximize the number of people who are applying to vote by mail or absentee earlier rather than later and flatten that curve, that will help, because it is true that there will be a crunch on our county election offices when they receive thousands, if not tens of thousands of applications to vote by mail close to the deadline. They are doing the best they can to staff up their offices and to get the right equipment to manage that sort of surge. But it'll help unequivocally, especially in our biggest counties, which Philadelphia is the biggest, if we maximize the number of people who go ahead and request their absentee or mail-in ballot earlier. The ballots are not set yet, and they won't be going out the door. They should be set, though, in a few weeks, later in August. And the first batch could be as many as 150,000, 175,000 ballots. All those people who have applied already, they will be the first ones to get their ballots, and they will have ample time to return it. So that's the one thing I'd start with. Again, we have the deadlines here for the applications and to return the ballots. The deadlines are the same for both absentee and mail-in ballot. So I know there's going to remain a little bit of confusion about the absentee ballot and the mail-in ballot. They're basically the same. And if you're not sure which one to use, just use the mail-in ballot. And the request deadline, again, is the Tuesday before the election at 5 o'clock. The Tuesday before the election this year is October 27th. So postmarks do not matter for that deadline, and that's another reason why it's important to apply early. And again, similarly, to get these ballots into your county on time, again, whether it's the absentee ballot or the mail-in ballot, it has to be back to the county by 8 o'clock on November 3rd. November 3rd is election day. And again, postmarks do not matter. So, we in Philadelphia and a number of other counties set up very quickly additional drop-off options for these ballots. There were a couple kind of reconstituted mailboxes. They were set up at City Hall and at the Delaware and Spring Garden election office before the primary. There was also a number of quote unquote mail-in drop-off sites but before the primary. This was problematic because these drop-off options became available and scheduled very, very late in the timeline. And the mailbox at City Hall further was surrounded by National Guard troops leading up to the primary, which made it very uncomfortable for a lot of people to, if they needed to go to that City Hall drop-off box, to actually get there and submit their ballot. So there are plans underway frantically to get these drop-off options pinned down and pinned down earlier and scheduled earlier, so people know long ahead of November 3rd, when the ballots would be due, what additional means they'll have to get their ballot returned in addition to the U.S. Postal Service. Incidentally, the U.S. Postal Service just released a statement suggesting that they're urging voters across the country to request their mail ballot at least 15 days before the election. Every state has its own election law, and the deadlines vary by state. So I think the U.S. Postal Service went kind of conservative here and urging a longer lead time for people to apply. But we would stress 15 days before the election would be a minimum. If folks are going to vote this way, apply again as early as you can, because there is some turnaround time between your request going in, your request being processed, a ballot being sent to you with all the associated materials, and then a chance for you to get that ballot back to the county. So there is some back and forth there that takes time, and necessitates applying earlier rather than later. So as far as like what you get when you get a mail ballot, and this past primary was my first time voting by mail. It was a good experience. I had all the time I wanted to look through the offices and the candidates and read the instructions 5 times to make sure I wasn't making any mistakes. Even for someone whose job it is to pay attention to elections, it was helpful to have the whole ballot in front of me, and I didn't have to worry about having it in my head or having it written down, which is what I usually do when I go to vote at a polling place. Who I'm going to vote for. So that feeling where you go into a voting system, you go into the voting booth, and you just have a few minutes to cast a ballot, and there's a line behind you, and you're hustling. One of the nice things about voting by mail is you can unpack this ballot envelope, and the ballot is right there for you to hopefully have days, if not weeks, to review and consider ahead of time. Now, some offices you may have your mind made up earlier rather than later. I'm sure the the presidency and other high level offices are probably pretty straightforward for a lot of people. But some of the offices down ballot you may not be as familiar with, and you may need to think about. There are going to be some number of ballot questions for Philadelphia voters to consider as well, at least a couple, and those will be listed on the ballot in English and Spanish. All these materials are bilingual in the city of Philadelphia, English and Spanish. And then also for the ballot questions, there will be state mandated summaries. So again, this is where you won't be in a voting booth and you see this question that you haven't heard of before, and you're struggling to kind of read the question, understand what it's asking. You will have, hopefully all the time in the world, all the time you would need to read the question, read the summary, do any research you think you might want to do, ask a friend or family member, hey, what, have any idea what they're talking about here, and then make your choices up. So, in this ballot pack, there's the envelope. There's an instruction card that says how you complete this ballot and how you return it. There's a secrecy envelope as well. If you can see in the picture, there's a very plain looking envelope that just says official election ballot. This is the secrecy envelope that you fold your ballot once you've completed it. You put it into that secrecy envelope, and then that secrecy envelope containing the ballot then goes into your return envelope. And this return envelope is what you actually put in the mail, and that goes back to the County Board of Elections. In our case here in Philadelphia, the City Commissioner's Office. And then, like I mentioned before, on this return envelope, there's both a declaration space. There's a little declaration for the voter to read, and then sign under, hey, I'm Pat Christmas. This is my ballot, and I swear I filled it out on my own, and this is mine. So you have to sign your name and your address. And then also on this envelope, there's a pre-printed barcode. And what's important to know here is that the barcode or your name on the outside of the envelope is in no way connected to your actual ballot. I mean, and that's part of the reason why that secrecy envelope is in there, is to make sure that the choices that you make on your ballot and your name and the that's on the exterior envelope are completely separate. right? It's required by law everywhere in the United States and everywhere they have a free and fair election, that the a voter's identity and who they vote for are entirely disconnected. So I want to make sure that that's clear as well, because the barcodes and people's name on the envelopes kind of can get people